So now we're going to put the heater together, the heater assembly. We're going to use 2 of these coupling bushes. They've got 8 facets on them. So we're going to put 8 resistors around these couplings. I'm going to glue them on with a thermal plaster. So before we do any of that, I just also need to mention we cleaned up all the facets just on the grinder. We just held it against the grinding wheel just to make it nice and flat and clean. And also just cleaned the end of this pipe fitting as well, this rod, I should say threaded pipe. So what we're going to do is just measure this to length now. So I'm going to screw that in. And I don't know if you can see that, but it goes exactly halfway in, and then the thread actually changes direction. And then I'm just going to mark on here, just mark where this actually enters the... Just going to put a mark on there. So you can see it goes around halfway in. So then I'm going to put a gap between these two, because when I put the resistors on, I want there to be a gap so I can work with the wires. I have to join those wires up, so I need to bring them up and out. So I'm going to leave at least probably an 5 to 8 mil gap. I'll probably try and aim around 6 mil. So I'm just going to line everything up. I'm just going to try and mark it while it's sitting out here. Doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm just going to mark it in between this bush here, so I'm going to cut it somewhere in here. That's where I'm going to do the next cut, so I'm going to use this as a coupling to join these 2 couplings together. So I'm just going to hacksaw that and clean it up with the grinder. So I've just cut it, and I've actually just cleaned up the outside edge, just arrowed the edge on the grinder. And I'm just going to actually deburr the internal face as well. Just make sure there's no burr in there and no material that's going to end up in your nozzle. And now we can actually just screw it together. So put your 2 couplings on. Just test it out. And when we're happy with it, I'll put a little bit of heatsink plaster on there and actually just tighten it up. So it's a nice gap in between. And we'll tighten it up shortly. Okay, I've got that coupling piece out again. Just grab your thermal paste and put a reasonable amount on there. It's going to do a couple of things. It's going to glue it, going to transfer the heat better, and also seal it as well, so it'll stop any plastic oozing through there. Let's put the first one on. Second side. I'll actually spread it into the thread. It'll probably work better. And tighten that up as much as you can. Try and get the excess off. And then we're ready to start gluing the resistors on. I'm going to start at the top. Now I'm going to give each one a couple of minutes to dry in between. So I'm just going to bend the wires up in the middle and then work my way around. So I'll just start with these 2, and these are 15 ohm 5 watt. I don't know if I mentioned that. And we're going to put, and it's going to be around 76 watts per coupling, and I'm just going to spread a tiny amount of paste on each face. You really don't want to apply too much. The thinner the better the heat transfer is going to be. So just a tiny amount there, and then just apply that, and just rub it together and push out as much as the excess as you can to the side. So you want as little as possible. And then do the next one. So just put quite a bit of force on there to spread the glue around. And then leave that alone. Just give it, I'm going to give it around 5 to 10 minutes and then glue the next ones. Okay, so we're just going to continue to glue on the resistors. I've just stuck one more on, and I've actually just cheated a little bit to speed up the drying process. I'm using a heat gun. I'll just show you what we're doing there. So bend your leg up, And also when you're gluing it, I tend to use that face with the writing on it, away from the back end of the resistor, or the bottom end. So again, just move it around until you squeeze all the glue out. And then I'm going to get my heat gun onto it. And we'll just let that cool off, and then we'll do the next ones. It should be enough to harden it so they don't move when we rotate the thing around. Okay, we've glued all our resistors on. Now I'm just going to put some Captain tape on the outside to hold it all in. Okay, so we've finished taping this. It's all ready for the next stage, and we're just going to put a ring of copper wire in between each of these. And so I've stripped back a ton of copper wire to work with. Just grabbed a 10 amp cable and stripped it down. I'm going to just make a couple of loops now, and the loops are going to be bigger than this ring here. So I'm just going to work something like that. We're going to have a double ring because it's going to get quite hot. So it'll be able to carry 20 amps quite comfortably. So we're just going to try and twist that up now. I'm just trying to work out how I'm going to do it. So probably start like that and actually just wrap this on itself. And leave a bit of a tail hanging out. So I'll cut a bit of extra length so I can just finish wrapping this and come back the other way. Sort of make it round. What I'll do next, I'll start wrapping these tails around, and I'll just do one on each side just to try and get it centered. So I've got some long nose pliers, and I'll just start pulling it through and wrapping it around. Because what tends to happen, these wires can get really hot and melt the solder. You still want electrical connection even if the solder melts. You don't want all the wires falling off. So do one, come around to the other side, do one on the other side. Just come around 90 degrees. So that's the first ring done. I'll just take that out so you can see. So now we're going to make a second and third ring for these ends. Probably won't record that. So I'll just get that done and get that put on, and then we'll do the next step. Okay, we've got the 3 rings on now, and now we're going to solder it. So you need your soldering iron pretty hot. I'll run mine at 450 temperature controlled iron. And ideally, now I haven't got the right solder. I should be just using a tin. It's got a higher melting point. This is a 60 tin 40 lead solder, which has got a lower melting point, which isn't ideal. Sometimes it melts. So ideally you should be using a pure tin solder. I don't have any, so I'm just going to use this. And we're just going to start just at one end, just going to tack all those on. Okay, I've cut a couple of strips of fire blanket, so I've grabbed an old fire blanket here, probably around $10 from Bunnings if you don't have access to a discarded one. So cut them just so I can squeeze them in there and just wrap it around. So I'm going to do that, and also grab the Captain tape. So I've grabbed some Captain tape, and I'm just going to use that to secure it afterwards. Just going to finish wrapping it. Repeat for the other side. And that's done. It's ready to put back onto the extruder. Okay, before we put it to the extruder, I'm just going to prep some wires on it. I'm just going to use 10 amp wiring for it, the high temperature stuff. So this actually comes off iron, and we've taken all the fabric off it, and it's like a silicon insulator. It won't melt so easily. So I'm just going to strip back some insulator and actually just wind it on there. So start winding it on there. So we're going to tie these two together, and that'll be, so this outside one will be plus or minus, and the other one will be the opposite. So if that's plus, it'll be minus. Just tie those two together, and then I'm going to join one onto that, and then the other one onto the other wire. And again, polarity doesn't matter. So we'll just throw some heat shrink on that. Right, I grabbed a bit of heat shrink and I'm just going to thread it over this wire just to insulate this join. And hopefully this won't get too hot and melt. And I'll cut these wires to length once I put it on the extruder. Okay, so we're just going to fit the new heater on here. So I actually had to heat this one up to melt the plastic. So I've actually brought it up to 168 degrees. So now I'm just going to undo the actual nozzle, and you should be able to test the plastic. Should be sort of in a rubbery state. And so I'm going to try and get that out now without shorting it out. Could be a challenge. Let's see how we go. I'm going to try and grip this. I need to turn it anti-clockwise. So what I have to do though, at this point, is actually unplug the heater, and so I'm going to lose heat to it, so I've got to do it quite quickly. So I'll turn the extruder off, and I've got to unwind it as quick as I can before it cools down, and I probably won't be able to extract that nozzle out of this heater, so I'm going to lose that nozzle and that thermistor. So I'm just going to undo the heater now. And while it's still hot, I'm just going to undo it. And maybe the thermistor as well. And then try and clear that plastic away while it's still hot. So I'll probably have to clean that thread and make up a new nozzle for the other one and screw that in. Okay, so we're going to make up a new nozzle. It's going to look similar to this one, and it's basically just a 1/4 inch air compressor nozzle, and we're going to drill a hole in here for the thermistor, so I'll do that next. So I've grabbed a 3mm drill bit, and we're just going to put, if you look at the nozzle, you can see, hopefully you can see, it's quite a bit of brass in there around that hole. So the brass sort of comes probably to where my fingernail is up there. So we've got quite a bit of brass to play with, so I'm going to drill a reasonable depth hole in there, probably at least 5mm, just for the head of the thermistor to sit in. So I'm just going to do that now. Probably could still go deeper, but that's going to be enough. So I've gone in probably a good 7 or 8 mils there, so nearly to the end of the brass there. And I'm going to set up the thermistor next. I've grabbed some wire off the actual hot end, because it's a high temperature wire, so I'm going to solder that onto the end of the thermistor. Okay, so I grabbed a thermistor, just a standard 100K I think it is, just the ones we use on the heat beds on the printers. And I'm going to grab a blade now and just carefully cut around and strip that wire off. Strip the insulation off. Do the same for the other wire. So what we've got to do now, this tricky bit, is actually thread that onto the thermistor. And just have a look to see how it's going to fit in your nozzle. It's going to sit in there nicely. So then I'm going to hold it in the soldering block. And we're going to trim these back now, trim the legs back. Preheat the soldering iron. I'm going to tin up all the legs. I might actually just strip the other end as well, just get that prepped. So we're going to extend those out as well. And try and get a reasonable amount of solder on the legs. Sometimes you get a ball to stick. These are really difficult to solder. So I've left a blob of solder on the leg there. Just going to solder that on. So that's ready to put some heat shrink on. It's got some 1mm heat shrink here. So make sure the insulation's all the way up to the head of the thermistor. Shrink that on. And then we're ready to fit it into the nozzle. So I'm just going to check it again. So it's going to sit in there like that, and I'm going to put a blob of thermal paste in the head there, and then I'm going to tape this onto the nozzle head as well. Okay, so grab the thermal plaster, put a blob. I'm going to try and squirt it into the hole. It's going to work. Good enough, won't need too much, and then just shove it in there. Probably do with a fraction more. Still room for a bit more. Try and get that tape started on there. I'll put a reasonable amount on there. Going to be quite a bit of pressure on it. But that shouldn't come off. Coat the tape, and we're ready for the next step, which will be to extend these wires out and put some JST crimps on. Okay, so I grabbed a bit of network cable, and I'm just going to strip the ends a bit. I've already stripped one. Make sure it's a multi-strand. Again, just use your 1mm heat shrink, cut a couple of lengths, about 20mm, and slide it on. Just tin up your wires. Grab some JST crimps. And solder it on. Now, polarity is not important. It's not polarity sensitive, it's just a resistor. When you put the crimps on, we only need to strip maybe 4 or 5 mils. I use the end of the crimp that actually grips the insulation. I don't use the actual main channel. I tend to close it up and then insert the wire and then just crush it closed. So we'll just insert it into the holder. Insert your wire. And then just close it up. And it only has to be just closed enough just to hold it while you're just going to put a tiny dab of solder on the crimp. And you've got to be really careful not to let the solder flow up the channel. It wants to flow up. It likes to wick up the channel. Tiny blob of solder there. And it's done. Next one. Fold the flaps over. So 2mm heat shrink for that is best. So you want to just cover the insulation. You want to get it to the insulation and then to the end of the crimp. So again, probably another 20mm. So that's ready to be mounted. So I'm going to put that on the extruder now. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to test the thermistor. Putting the multimeter on the ohms test. So 89k at the moment, so that's good reading. Means it's alive. And I'm going to fit that onto the new heater element. It doesn't matter which way it goes on. And I'll use the vice grips to tighten it up. Actually, I'm going to glue that in. So I've got the thermal plaster again, and I'm just going to stick some on the thread. It'll hopefully stop the plastic oozing out, and stop it coming undone. So put a good bit on the beginning of the thread. If you look at the old single heater one, you can see the ooze. You can see the plastic's been oozing out over the course of a year or two, and it's actually just it's pushing against the wire here, but it still works. But yeah, it's a bit ugly. And okay, so we're just going to insert that now. Actually, I'm just going to push the paste into the thread. Screw it in. I'm just going to do it up with some vice grips. So that hopefully won't come out, and we can now finally fit it onto the extruder.